everybody, wanted to do a quick video today about the dual battery system that I just installed in my truck. I kind of want to go over what a dual battery system is, what it isn't, what it's used for, and then a couple different options that you could go through to do a very simple version to a very extravagant version. I'm kind of in the middle here. So first of all, what a dual battery system is not. When I first heard that, I thought all you were doing was adding a battery to your existing electrical system, having it charge off the alternator, and just increase the capacity of your vehicle's electrical system. That is not the case, and that wouldn't really work all that well, because if you did run that down to zero, you're also running your starter battery down to zero. So there's got to be some separation there. It charges off the system when the vehicle is on, but when the vehicle is turned off and the alternator is not running, the systems are separate. So you can run your secondary battery down to zero and not affect your starter battery. So that said, I kind of want to go through the components of a dual battery system. The first thing you're going to need is the battery itself. So there's a couple different options. I think a lot of people are going to go with the lithium-ion battery nowadays because they can run down to zero and get charged back up to 100% multiple times, and they don't get affected negatively from that nearly as bad as a lead-acid battery does. A lead-acid battery can only provide about half of its capacity. So if you have a 100 amp hour lead-acid battery, you can run about 50 amp hours out of it before you're doing irreparable damage to it and shortening the life cycle and capacity of that battery for future use. So for me, I went with a 100 amp hour LiFePO, I don't know what all that stands for, but it's a lithium-ion battery inside of a battery box here. And I went with 100 amp hours because for me, 100 amp hours will run this refrigerator freezer for a little over 2 days. And then I also have the ability to charge it with solar. So I'm good to go for pretty much as long as I want to go camping with that. And then I can also run a couple accessories. I could charge my kids' iPads. We could have a fan on. I can run my compressor off this thing if I need to, things like that. So once you have your battery selected, you're going to need some sort of DC to DC charger. There are a ton of brands out there, and I'll actually go. So I went with a REDARC. It's an Australian company. I figure this is a well-known company in Australia. If it can handle the Australian outback, people overlanding over there, it can definitely handle anything I'm going to throw at it here on the east coast of the United States. You could also go with RENOGY or Vivo or Lifetime or Victron or NOCO, or the list goes on and on. If you go on and do a web search for DC to DC charger, you're going to find so many different options. I read a couple forums on overlanding and like van life type things, and REDARC was a pretty popular one because it can handle a lot of heat if you wanted to mount it up in your engine bay. It's weather resistant. It's got like everything all taped up, so it could be like, you know, up in your engine bay or in the open bed of a truck or something like that, and it'll handle all that. And it has the ability to take in solar power up to a 32 voltage on an open circuit solar panel. I have a 28 volt solar panel, so it is definitely within the range. This one's 220 watts, so it'll charge my entire battery in a day of decent sunlight. So there you go. You need a battery, you need some sort of charger, and then next thing you're going to need is a battery box of some sort. So I went ahead and bought this one right here. Basically, you stick your battery in it, you hook up the two terminals, and then it already has all the things you need up here. This thing has a resettable 15 amp fuse. It has some USB ports up here to charge phones, iPads, things like that. And then it has a 12 volt port like a cigarette lighter, so I could plug my refrigerator into that. This refrigerator does not draw more than 10 amps, even on startup, so it will definitely not reset this breaker. I've had it in here for a long time to me, about a month now, and it has been running kind of nonstop, just keeping stuff cold that I keep in here, and I drive my truck every day, so it's charging enough and staying alive. It has never tripped the breaker. The other thing it has is a couple Anderson plugs. These are rated up to 50 amps, so one of these, since these are both hardwired to the battery with the 50 amp fuse here, one of my inputs from my DC charger goes in here. The other one is an output to whatever accessory I want to run off of an Anderson plug. You can buy Anderson plugs on Amazon for dirt cheap, wire up all your stuff, and go from there. This also has a couple battery terminals. So like my compressor, for example, has the alligator clips. In the past, I had to pop the hood. I would always have the engine on, so it's charging. I'd hook up to that, and then I could run the compressor. Now, I can do it without the vehicle on and just draw off this battery and hook it up to these two terminals, run my compressor, air up my tires when I'm done on the trail, things like that. So this is great. What I will say is now that I've installed this and when I put it in the back of my truck, I don't like the fact that all of this stuff has to be outside of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cannibalize this box, get a nice Pelican case where I can fit all of this stuff inside of there with the battery and do all my cable management inside that box. So all I have is a single power wire coming from the back of my truck going into the box, and all this stuff is hidden in there. I will also have to have a plug for my solar input right here, but that's it. It's basically going to be 2 Anderson plugs for inputs, one from the vehicle, one from solar, and then I'll have 2 Anderson plugs for outputs to whatever I want to charge. And then I'll pull all this stuff over there too, my voltage meter, my my USB, and then my 12 volt, and I'll put these terminals on there as well. So if you want to keep it simple, you can do something like this, but just know you're going to have a mess of wires. If you wanted to go a little bit more high-end and build your own battery box, you can do that as well. There are a ton of videos, and when I make mine, I will also make a video on that. So the final thing you're going to need to do is run your power cables and your ground cables, and then do all of your cable management. For me, I went with 6-gauge wire. You can find all the different charts you need, 12 volts at 25 amps, up to 30 feet of wire. 6-gauge is more than enough. They say 8-gauge could work at 24 feet. I have 24 feet, but I still went with 6-gauge. If I went to a higher amperage charger, I would have had to go to 4-gauge or even like 2 or 0-gauge wire. I didn't want to go that route. I only have a 100 amp hour battery. This will charge in 4 hours, and I really don't intend to take it all the way down to 0 and need to charge it all at once. And I also have solar for when I'm out camping, so it's constantly kind of keeping that charge state up and good. So I do want to take the camera and show you how I actually wired this thing, because if you have a Ranger, this might actually help you. If you don't, you can get an idea of what we're doing, and then you can, figure out how you're going to run your wire yourself. All right, so here we are in the engine bay of my Ford Ranger Raptor. This is the 6-gauge wire that I have coming off my positive battery terminal going back. The first thing it goes through is a 40 amp fuse. This is the same kind of fuse you would get when you run like a amplifier install kit or something like that. And just to be aware, these fuses are not protecting the circuitry that you're connecting. These fuses are here to protect the actual cabling. If you were to, over the years, wear this down at some point where you have it connected so that the insulation is worn down and you end up grounding it out, if you didn't have a fuse here, it would just keep sending current. It would heat this wire up. It could start a fire. It can cause serious electrical problems to the rest of your vehicle. So just know you're supposed to have a fuse within 1 foot of where you connect it, and that protects the cable all the way back. That BCDC charger has its own fault protection in it with its own fuses, so it will protect itself, but you got to run fuses on your cables to protect the cabling and the vehicle itself from catching fire. Up here, I also have a couple other things I've already hooked up. I have an 8-gauge wire here that I have for a subwoofer, 10-gauge wire for a 200 watt amplifier for my speakers. So up in here, I put it in wire loom after the fuse, and I have it sent back down, down through the wheel well here, and it goes along the frame on the driver's side, and then it goes across to the passenger side ahead of the rear axle, because that's where the exhaust goes up and over, and I didn't want that heat on it. And I just zip tied this to existing wiring harnesses. I figure the Ford engineers knew where they could put wires, so I ran mine zip tied to their wiring harnesses all the way back. All right, so we're underneath the truck on the driver's side looking forward. There's the driver's side tire, and I'm gonna start angling up here, and I don't know if this is upside down for you or not, but basically this is the wire coming from the back of the truck, which is that way going forward, and up into the actual engine bay area, and it's zip tied to another Ford wiring harness, which you can see that label there. So I just tied into that one. As you come back down here, you can see it again, sort of right here. I don't know if you can see, there's the wiring harness there. It goes over this big plastic wiring harness because I couldn't get that thing opened up to put it inside of there. But then you can see it again right there. And then it comes back here and it's zip tied to that existing wiring harness. And I really need to come down here with some wire cutters and clean up all the zip ties that I did. Sort of in a hurry. And then right here, it goes over the frame to the other side. So this is where it comes back over the frame here, goes back down over the fuel tank there with all these other wiring harnesses for a while. And then you can sort of still see it. But basically, you just run it with all the other wiring harnesses. That's what I'm saying. Find other wiring harnesses you can run it to and make sure that you're not going to have it overheat or get really hot when it goes next to any exhaust pipes or anything. All right, so now we're on the passenger side, the right side of the truck in the back, and I'm gonna go up under here and show you where the wires go up so they can come out in that corner there. So here's the passenger side exhaust pipe coming out, and then as you start looking up, You can see my wires going in, and there's about a 2-inch hole there that goes up to a small hole up in the bed that you can pull those wires out. I used a piece of 550 cord and just kind of stuck it down there, grabbed it out with my fingers, tied the wires to it and pulled them through. It took about an hour to do both of the 6-gauge wires in the wiring loom, and then also my signal wire here that I have going to auxiliary switch number 4 on my Ranger Raptor, which is really only powered when the switch is on and the truck is on. So if the switch is off or the truck is off, this won't be powered and it won't be drawing current. So I have the power wire, you can see, kind of going back here along the frame, further back, and then it goes across the frame, I think up there somewhere. I don't even remember. But like I said, I zip tied it to existing wiring harnesses. And then finally, the ground comes down, and I actually bolted the ground to the frame. So this is the actual part of the frame. This is not part of the bed or the tow hitch or anything like that. This was a hole that was already in the frame. I scraped it down with a screwdriver and a file, got it really clean, bare metal, put my ring terminal on here and bolted it in. And you can see on the inside, it's just a regular bolt. It's nothing special. I did put a lock washer and a lock nut on there. And then when I was done, I spray painted the entire thing with some rubberized Rust-Oleum so that it would cover it back up so I wouldn't get rust back here, and that the connection was protected a little bit. All right, so there's how I ran the power wires back to here, and then we get back to this part, and I actually labeled each of my wires on my BCDC 1225. So this says right here, power in, so this is gonna be power from the truck, where this comes out up in this corner. So I have my positive 12 volt from the battery, I have my negative going to the frame, and then finally I have my little, what is this, my 12 volt signal wire coming from auxiliary switch 4, and that's what this one is here. So I've got power, ground, auxiliary. This is my 12 volt output from the BCDC charger that's going to go into the battery to charge the battery. And then finally, I have my solar input. If I didn't want to have it hooked up to the vehicle, I can hook it up to solar. And I made this little adapter kit because the solar panel is actually made for an EcoFlow, and it uses a different kind of connector, but I just hooked it up to a cable that I bought that ties into the EcoFlow panel and hooked up an Anderson connector to it. Super easy. So there you have it, guys. That is the system I put in my truck. It might be a little complex. It might not be all that impressive to some of you guys. I did take some electrical engineering, double E classes in college. I'm a systems engineer. I've always enjoyed installing car stereos and doing electrical work and stuff like that. So to me, this was a lot of fun. I realize it is not for everybody. There are a lot of different options out there. You could do something as simple as buying something like a Jackery, or I have this EcoFlow. Basically, it's just a battery powered generator, if you want to call it that. It's a big 12 volt battery in here, similar to this one, 100 amp hours, and it has inverters for a bunch of 110 plugs here. It's got a 12 volt plug here, so you could plug in like a refrigerator or freezer. And then on the other side, it has a whole bunch of USB-Cs and USB-A ports. And this thing will run about as long as this thing, but just know when you're converting DC to 110, you're gonna lose some, and you're not gonna be able to run things quite as long. You could also install a 110 converter in whatever battery box you build, so you have a couple 110 ports if you wanted to bring a coffee maker or something like that when you go camping. Another thing you could do, and then, so go back to this, with this, you could just charge it from the 12 volt port that you have in the back of your truck, or if you just have a regular car, keep this up in the front seat and plug it into your 12 volt cigarette lighter port type thing up inside your vehicle. You don't want to draw too many amps through that. I think most of them are only rated for like 20 amps. I would keep it at like 10 to 15 just to make sure you're not overheating any wires. I know it's engineered for that, but if you run 20 amps through something that's rated for 20 amps for 10 hours, it might heat up more than you're comfortable with. It shouldn't ever burn down or cause a fire or short out, but you know, just be careful. Use a little bit of common sense and you'll be good to go. So you could do this thing without running any wires. Plug it into the back of your truck. It'll only charge when the truck is on. When the truck is off, you have your standalone battery. You can take this thing with you wherever you want to go. You could plug in solar to it. Like I said, this is a solar panel that ties into this. And this is what I was using until I installed my dual battery system. And then an even simpler version is something like this battery that I have right here for my refrigerator, and I bought this when I bought the refrigerator. So this is a set power refrigerator. I also have the EcoFlow version, which is a dual zone, but the EcoFlow would shut itself off to protect the compressor when I was out on the off-road trails. When it hit like 20 degrees, it would turn itself off and it wouldn't automatically turn itself back on. This set power is made more for off-roading. It can go to like 30, 35 degrees. I've never had this kick off on the trails I've been on. And this little battery right here, I think it's like a 12 or 15 amp hour battery. So this thing will run my my refrigerator here for about 10 to 12 hours on eco mode, keeping things nice and cold. So this is a good option too. It has a USB-C, it has a USB-A port, it has this 12-volt port, and then you can charge it with your 12-volt port on your truck or inside your house before you go with a 110 plug. So that's another option for if you want to just keep it simple and you only have one or two appliances, and if you're only going for a day or one night of camping or something like that. So anyway, hopefully this was helpful to all of you guys. If you have any questions, please let me know. There are so many resources out there for dual battery systems. And really, once you get started on it, it can be a little bit addicting. I'm already excited about building my own battery box, having just a single input on the box for my vehicle here, and then a single input for solar, and then all these other plugs on the other side, having all of this hidden away. It's just gonna be a whole lot cleaner. It'll have a handle so I can carry it out to my trailer, things like that. And I might still bring this as well, just for the kids to have their own battery pack for all their devices and crap, because I do love bringing them camping. I love to get them off their devices, but they get bored after the campfire's out and they're not ready to go to sleep. So they'll download videos and watch that stuff out in the tent and just have a good time. So that's it. Hopefully this is helpful to you guys. Like I said, if you have questions or comments, or you saw a way I could have done this better, please let me know. I'm always open to improvements. I'm always open to learn things, and I've learned a lot from you guys in the past. So cheers. Have a great weekend, everybody. And now that I'm done, I got to put everything away. All right, guys, there you have it. Everything's all buttoned back up. If I look at the back of this thing, the lights are not on. It's not pulling any charge from the battery itself. But it is turned on because I have this thing and it's powering my refrigerator. So with the truck off, like I said, this will run for a little over 2 days, keeping my refrigerator going. All right, I know this video was about the dual battery system, but I do want to go over one other thing. I just did the oil change in my truck at 25,000 miles. I used my new Ronin oil drain plug. It was awesome. I hooked the hose up to it. I did still make a little bit of a mess because the hose had a bend to it, but it was great. The thing I wanted to talk about is, if you've already heard about it, these trucks have a wet belt. All the EcoBoost motors have a wet belt. You gotta be careful with what oil you use. There is a special additive in the oil for Ford wet belt motors, basically, all the EcoBoost. There's a couple other companies that do this too. Volkswagen has wet belts. I think Alfa Romeo, there might be a couple other ones, but Ford, all the EcoBoost have it. Said if you use the wrong oil, that belt can start to deteriorate and fall apart early, and then you have little bits of belt that are going to be getting sucked into your oil return, clogging that up, and then you're going to have oil starvation to your engine. So just be aware when you do change your oil that you either go to Ford and buy the Motorcraft oil, or if you want to get your own AMSOIL or Royal Purple or whatever you're going to use, make sure it has it's specified for a wet belt system like the Ford EcoBoost motors, so that it has that additive to keep that belt from deteriorating. Another thing is to change your oil often. I know the Ford recommends 10,000 miles, and it will probably last 100,000 miles doing that, but if you want it to continue to last past that, I would recommend 5,000 miles, and there's two reasons for that. First and foremost, this is a twin turbocharged kind of high output motor. It gets a little hot. Those turbos break down the oil a little bit faster, so you're just going to want to stay on top of it. The second, and what I think the more important thing, is be wary of fuel dilution. So in direct injected engines like ours, a little bit of fuel can get past the piston rings down in the crankcase and start to dilute into the oil. And as you have fuel diluting into the oil loses some of its lubricating features, and now that little thin film of oil that your impeller's spinning on, the shafts are spinning on, isn't quite as lubricating, and you're going to start wearing into the turbo. Other things, obviously your whole engine needs to be lubricated, so fuel dilution is the enemy. I don't know, when I did my oil change, I took a sample. I'm gonna send it off to Blackstone to have it, you know, looked at, and then they'll send me the results. And I'm looking for a couple things. I'm making sure there's no coolant, transmission fluid, or anything like that in the oil. I'm curious what the fuel dilution is in there, if it's 1%, if it's 3%, or if there's none at all, which would be fantastic. And then finally, what else am I looking for on an oil? Obviously how worn down it is, but no, I guess that's it. So I will let you guys know what I get back from Blackstone when they send me the results. Oh, the other thing was any rubber particulates in there. If that belt is actually starting to fall apart, I did inspect the oil filter when I did the oil change just to see if I saw anything in there. I didn't, so that's a good thing. But anyway, it's always a good idea every once in a while to get your oil analyzed, just so you know what's going on. It can tell you if you have a head gasket that's starting to go, if you start having coolant or transmission fluid in there. And then again, fuel dilution is another big one. So that's it for today. I know I said I was done earlier, but I just wanted to throw that out there. Cheers, everybody.
It's over!